everybody. Welcome back up to the Vinyl Attic for another fun-filled episode of Vinyl Fetish, where we are counting through the 100 albums that should be in your collection. 100 albums that, according to me, are very important and worthwhile listening to. And I'm very excited because we're talking about, today, Cheap Trick's September 1979 album, The Dream Police, their fourth album produced by Tom Werman. Such an important record. I have such great love for this album. In fact, when I was 15 years old, I had a mobile hanging from the roof of my bedroom that was a big box. It was a record store display of this album. So I would sleep under the Cheap Trick Dream Police every night. I wonder if that affected my dreams. I want to talk about it for a couple reasons. One is, last time we were talking about it, we were talking about Electric Light Orchestra's 1976 album, A New World Record, and how that album inspired my first novel, Mission of the Sacred Heart. This album actually inspires the follow-up to that book, which is the 2015 book, The Dream Police, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. So this album was actually done early in 1979, but because of the success of the previous album, which was Cheap Trick Live at Budokan, they sort of moved back the release date. Cheap Trick Live at Budokan was not intended to be released to an American audience. It was just a Japanese album. They had released Cheap Trick had released 3 albums in the United States. 2 of them were produced by Tom Werman, and the first one, which I think is also an album that matters, the first Cheap Trick album was produced by Jack Douglas, hadn't really sold that well. Had kind of an audience. I loved them from the very beginning. I learned about them on the first album, and I've been a Cheap Trick fan since day one of the first album, but they didn't really have an audience. And then Budokan came out, and it exploded. It was first an import, and people started buying it. Radio stations started playing it, and all of a sudden it became this huge thing. They released it domestically in the United States, and it went to the top of the charts. Had, the huge live versions of Ain't That a Shame on the radio all the time, Surrender on the radio all the time. And so it was one of those examples, like Frampton Comes Alive, where even an artist that has a relatively small but loyal audience, it then releases a live album, and the live album is the thing that jettisons them into the stratosphere of popularity. So very similar, not an uncommon thing in the 1970s for live albums to really be the launching pads for major artists in the second half of the 70s. This album, produced by Tom Werman, was much more expansive. There's a lot more going on. It's not sort of a straight power pop. In fact, there's one song on here, Gonna Raise Hell, that's 9 minutes and 20 seconds long that is epic. It folds in strings from Heaven Tonight and is very visual. You feel like you're in a whole nother world, maybe with dancers or something. And there is a song that was a new cut on the Live at Budokan album, Need Your Love, which gets a proper studio treatment here. That's also brilliant. Tom Peterson, the bass player, gets a lead song on I Know What I Want and I Know How to Get It. It's a great song. All these songs are so great. Voices was also a big single, not just the title track. And the thing about Cheap Trick was they had this sort of shtick on the second and third albums in the live album, which was they had 2 good-looking guys in the band. Singer Robin Zander and bass player Tom Peterson, square-jawed, handsome guys. And they had 2 goofy-looking guys, Rick Nielsen, the guitarist, and Bunny Carlos, the drummer. And they would often put them on the back of the album. And so the kind of gimmick was they had these goofy-looking guys in this band that were amazing musicians. I mean, Rick Nielsen with like a guitar with 10 nicks on it, just shredding. So they were heavy metal, they were new wave, they were punk, they were a little bit of everything. And what the Dream Police did is kind of put all that together and give it sort of a sweeping, dare I say it, more Beatle-esque sound to it. And there's an interesting thing going on here when I say Beatle-esque, because in 1979, when this record came out, there started to be some rumors about something happening that involved Mr. John Lennon. That John Lennon retired from the music business in 1975. He had a son, and he was just going to bake bread. And supposedly he was a huge fan of this album and started thinking about recording again. We mentioned before in a previous video that hearing the B-52s and how they sounded like Yoko was also an influence. But he heard something in Cheap Trick that reminded him of the Beatles. And I think Robin Zander and John Lennon have very similar vocal styles. The producer of the first Cheap Trick album, Jack Douglas, ended up starting to work with John Lennon in 1980, starting to put together what would be Lennon's comeback. And in doing so, he brought in Rick Nielsen and Bunny Carlos to record some demos with John, including Losing You, which if you ever get to hear that version with the Cheap Trick guys on it, is brilliant. Also at the time, adding to this sort of Beatle chat that was happening, after Double Fantasy comes out, the next Cheap Trick album, the one that follows up the Dream Police, All Shook Up, is produced by George Martin, the producer of the Beatles, the literal fifth Beatle. And so there's all this sort of Beatle, John Lennon stuff in the air. And the rumor was, in the fall of 1980, was that John Lennon was planning on going on tour. George Harrison had toured the United States in 74. Paul had toured with Wings in 76. That 1981 was going to be the year that John Lennon toured, and Cheap Trick was going to be his band, either the opening band or his backing band. And to think about Cheap Trick with John Lennon playing Cold Turkey, or playing Come Together, or playing I'm Losing You, or whatever gets you through the night, I mean, whatever would have been on the sound, mind-blowing to think about that happening. But obviously, on December 8th, 1980, John Lennon was brutally murdered, and none of that was to happen, shattering all our dreams, including, me at 16, who was ready to go see John in concert. I was ready to camp out for those tickets for weeks, if it took weeks. So this record has like some Beatle thing happening in it because of that cross-pollination, and maybe it's just us who remember that moment, that are hearing the Beatles and the strings and the melodies and the innovativeness of the Dream Police. But I also had this book out. I mentioned that I had this book that kind of dealt with the issue of suicide and how hard it is to commit suicide, how music can help people who are suicidal. Years later, I wanted to catch up with some of those characters, mainly Zach and Lenny, and where they were in the 21st century, and wrote this book, The Dream Police. And similar to the last album, I used the Dream Police album here. Each chapter is a song on the album, and it deals with the issue of lucid dreaming. The notion that you can be conscious in your dreams enough to control them. And there's a technique that's studied. This isn't sort of craziness. This is not some YouTube video about, stuff that doesn't exist. There's a real science to lucid dreaming where you're sort of conscious as you're drifting off enough to, when you get to REM sleep, you can be like, oh, I'm now in a dream. This is a dream, so the normal rules don't apply. I can fly, I can walk through walls, I can have a date with Marilyn Monroe, whatever I want to do. And so what the characters in this book use lucid dreaming is to travel through time. Lenny mainly wants to go back and see all the bands that he wanted to see. Wants to go see Led Zeppelin, wants to see the Beatles at the Cavern, that you can consciously do this. And while I was writing this, I was doing lucid dreaming pretty regularly, including flying through the roof of this house and looking down on it because I wanted to, or traveling to see bands that I never would have gotten a chance to see. The main character, Zach, uses it to go back in time and fix a tragic event that happens in his life, which involves the death of his pregnant wife, and how he uses lucid dreaming. And there is, in fact, a science fiction-y science theory about time travel as a possibility. And it doesn't involve wormholes. It doesn't involve, the grandfather paradox where you go back in time and you screw everything up. That there is sort of this legitimate idea about how time travel into other dimensions that are at different places in time is possible. So I wrote this book around that, but inspired by each song on the Dream Police album. There you go. There's the cover done by Andy Barrios. That's a picture she painted of a picture she took of me sleeping in bed. Look, there's my butt. Oh, that one looks very different when you do it like that, doesn't it? So you can get it on Amazon. I'll include the link in the description below. If you're a Cheap Trick fan, there's lots of little clues in here for Cheap Trick fans. And I know there might be a few watching. Okay, I wanted to talk about this album. I have a feeling that I'm going to have to talk about the first Cheap Trick album, Cheap Trick, because it is so weird and important. But I wanted to, since I talked about the ELO album, I wanted to talk about the Dream Police. God, I love this record. It sounds even better now, I think. Next time, speaking of live albums, next time we're going to talk about one of the coolest live albums ever that some rock fans might not know about, but it is, I think, officially the coolest live album ever. We're going to talk about Frank Sinatra live at the Sands. Who let all these people into my room? We're going to do that next time when we get together to talk about records. Cheap Trick Matters, they're still playing. Robin Zander is still wearing his little hat. They're still out there rocking and rolling. They're one of the best bands ever to come out of America. We want to salute them. This album matters so much at such a moment in time, even if it didn't turn into a Cheap Trick John Lennon tour of 1981. And of course, You Matter. So let's talk about it.